Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Nearness of You by K.G. Fletcher, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Lauren's voice echoed warmly through the cozy upscale bar at the St. Regis Hotel in Atlanta. She gripped the microphone and closed her eyes, willing herself to relax into the painfully romantic Rodgers and Hart song Where or When. It had been a rough day, and she was thankful to be in the dreamy space doing what she loved the most, singing. Her accompanist, Miles Brooks, played effortlessly, using his whole body to play the baby grand, occasionally looking up and smiling at her. He was like a brother, their years of performing together on and off in shows and gigs a testament to their long friendship. He had had better days as well. She hated that he was going through a bitter divorce that involved his two young kids who he adored. To see him in his element, oblivious to his current problems and lost in the music, was comforting and helped to ease her tension. Her rough day was nothing compared to what he was going through. During a musical interlude, Lauren brought the microphone down to her lap and smiled as she looked out into the audience of mostly businessmen, doing her best to exude her femme fatale persona. She wore a black cocktail dress with just enough cleavage to make them take notice. Her 4-inch open-toed heels allowed her scarlet toenails to peek through. She never overdid the makeup, relying on her natural beauty enhanced by an extra application of mascara and lip gloss. She'd pulled her honey-colored hair up on one side, the Veronica Lake style adding to her sultriness as a lounge singer. Even though the hotel paid her an hourly rate that was better than most, she relied heavily on generous tips from the upscale clientele, using pure talent to draw in the crowd with her voice and song selections. Miles had his eyes closed, playing through the chorus, his shaggy jet black hair hanging over his brow. She swayed on the stool and brought the mic back up to her lips to finish the ballad, the song ending with polite applause from the Friday night crowd that had started to form. The St. Regis was located in the heart of Buckhead, and Lauren anticipated a good payday, especially if enough date-night couples wandered in later with requests. Thank you so much. I'm Lauren Rose, and the handsome fella on the piano is Miles Brooks. We're going to take a short break. If you have any requests, please let us know, and we'll do our very best to accommodate you. She gave the audience one last smile before turning to Miles. Light jazz started to seep into the bar area over several speakers hidden in the dark paneled walls. That was awesome, she said, her sultry piano bar voice replaced with just a hint of southern drawl. Miles stood and loosened the bow tie of his working tux. Thanks, girl. Feels good to relax and just play. She grimaced sympathetically, clipping her microphone back on the chrome stand. You want anything from the bar? He asked. No, I'm good. I'll see you back here in 20 minutes. Sounds good. She watched him shove his hands into his pockets and navigate between the tiny tables and overstuffed chairs. She sighed and grabbed her small purse, intent on making her way to the ladies' room. Just as she suspected, an elderly gentleman who was a well-known regular stood as she passed his table, holding his wrinkled hand out to her. He was impeccably dressed in a custom suit, his platinum cufflinks winking at her in the soft light. Charles, how are you? The sultry voice was back as she extended her hand. He grabbed it and kissed it lightly, smiling. Lauren, my dear, you are a sight for my old eyes. She laughed and shook her head. Are you enjoying the show? Always. And what can I dedicate to my favorite handsome man this evening? Charles put his aged index finger against his wrinkled lips and thought for a moment. Can you do that classic song, the one about the bell? A look of nostalgia briefly crossed his crinkly face, and she knew he was trying to remember the old Frank Loesser song from the musical Guys and Dolls. It was one he requested on a regular basis. Lauren grabbed both of his hands, looked him in the eye, and tilted her head. Only for you, Charles. He grinned from ear to ear and nodded happily before he pulled a $50 bill from his expensive suit jacket and placed it into her palm. You're a real gem. She kissed his cheek, and he politely stepped back so she could continue to the hallway where the ladies' room was located. She tucked the $50 into her purse. A big tip for a song dedication. It couldn't get any easier than that. Quickly, she primped in front of the gilded mirror in the upscale marble bathroom and was making her way back to the bar in the dimly lit hallway when a male voice with a distinct British accent stopped her in her tracks. "Excuse me, miss." Looking up with a smile, ready to accommodate another song request, she was taken aback, her breath catching in her chest. The man was tall, dark, and handsome, and he looked very familiar. She started to panic, trying to place him in the shadowy light. "I didn't mean to startle you. I wanted to ask, that last song you just sang. It sounded so familiar. Who is the artist?" The molecules in her brain shifted, and she was suddenly aware of who was standing before her. In an effort not to faint or start screaming, she placed her hand on her heaving chest and tried to breathe again, all the while his steady gaze penetrating her entire being. She swallowed hard, trying to get some moisture back into her throat so she could respond, but it felt as if her entire mouth had been force-fed a bucket of sand. The gorgeous man was holding a martini glass and looking like he had just stepped out of a high-class advertisement, his designer clothing obvious. That song was, she cleared her throat. It's a Richard Rogers song. She eyed his drink and without thinking took it out of his hands. Do you mind? She didn't wait for his response, anxious to send moisture onto her hot tongue. She threw the drink back in one gulp before choking on the alcohol that burned going down her throat. "Oh my God, what was that?" she asked, scowling. He gently took the empty glass back from her, his index finger brushing her hand slightly. "Well, that was my gin martini. May I get you something more to your liking?" He tried not to smile, but his blue eyes tinged with humor and gave him away. Lauren held the back of her hand to her mouth and stared. "I know who you are," she whispered, wide-eyed. "You're the super—" He interrupted her quickly by abruptly grabbing her by the elbow. "Let me buy you a drink." He started to lead her to the mahogany bar where her friend Tim was bartending. "Hey, Lauren, how is it going?" Tim asked as he wiped down the polished wood in front of them. Could he tell that she was coming undone being in the presence of one of the most stunning, sought-after male models on the planet? She recalled a recent trip to New York with some of her girlfriends. They had stood in the middle of Times Square taking several pictures of this man's famous image plastered on a giant billboard, his gorgeous half-naked body on display for all the world to see, wearing designer underwear. She started to swoon thinking about it. "Good, Tim," she replied a little too quickly, her voice 3 octaves higher than normal. She glanced at the illustrious man who was standing mere inches from her, not sure if she would be able to continue a conversation. Her entire body felt like it was buzzing, and she thought she might hyperventilate. She sank onto the leather bar stool, hoping it wasn't obvious that she was coming undone. "Sparkling water for you?" Tim asked knowingly. Lauren never drank while she performed, a lesson she'd learned many years ago when she had made the mistake of going to happy hour with friends before a show. She couldn't remember the lyrics that night because of one too many shots of tequila. She was lucky the manager hadn't fired her. "Yes, please," she squeaked. "And for you, sir?" He leaned his strong arm back against the back of her bar stool and reached for a cashew in the crystal bowl, his bulging bicep almost grazing her breast. "I should like another gin martini, Tim. Hendricks, please, with a cucumber garnish." His British cadence was sophisticated and debonair, accentuating his high-class image. Tim placed a green-tinted bottle of sparkling water in front of Lauren and proceeded to mix the martini. She tried to open her drink with her trembling hands, but the cap wouldn't budge. "Allow me, Lauren," he said, taking it from her, the L of her name sounding beautiful with his lilting articulation. He effortlessly turned the cap just once and handed it back to her, his chiseled features dangerously close to her lips. She offered a polite smile before taking a sip, and almost choked when he started to speak, palming her back with his hand. "Feeling any better?" She licked her lips and placed the bottle back on the bar. "Yes, thank you." She felt her cheeks flush, surprised when he leaned in and whispered into her ear. It's nice to meet you, Lauren. You have a lovely voice. His warm breath made her insides tingle. She inhaled deeply before answering. Thank you. It's nice to meet you, too. You have a lovely face. She forced herself not to roll her eyes after the words came out of her mouth, pursing her lips. What a stupid thing to say. His name was David Randall. He was a muscular English model who was famous for his masculine fashion spreads. He toured internationally for a broad portfolio of clients, magazine covers, editorial shoots, interviews, industry awards, and television appearances. He was extremely popular in the United States, his face and body always recognizable on numerous magazine covers and racks at the local supermarket, or on television in glamorous commercials advertising men's cologne or designer underwear. I'm so sorry for taking your drink from you. That was really rude. She could hardly look at him in the eyes for fear that his gaze might paralyze her. That's quite all right. You took me by surprise. He reached for his new drink that Tim had placed on a white cocktail napkin and raised it in the air. Cheers. Lauren quickly fumbled for her bottled water and tapped it against his crystal glass, bashfully looking down to avoid contact. Cheers. She started to take a sip before he interrupted her. Well, that's no good. You know what they say. If you can't look a person in the eye when they make a toast, well, your sex life is shot to bloody hell. She gave him a panicked look, and he burst out laughing, his blue eyes bright and vibrant. His face softened as she continued to stare at him. That's more like it. He leaned into her. I'm not going to bite you, Lauren. You can look at me. That was the problem. She wanted to gawk at him for hours. She quickly looked away. I'm sorry, Mr. Randall. Oh, please, call me David. He sat his glass down and leaned on the bar in an effortless pose. She shyly shifted her gaze back to his face, his striking, perfect supermodel face. Okay, David, I have to admit, She looked around apprehensively before leaning into him and whispering, I'm kind of starstruck by you. He sighed, his blue eyes paling. Please don't be. I'm just a normal man who puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like everyone else. His eyes were mesmerizing, cerulean pools she was tempted to get lost in. It is I who have been starstruck by you, Lauren Rose. He raised one eyebrow as if beckoning her into a trance. She couldn't believe he had remembered her full name. I truly look forward to hearing you sing again in your next set. He nonchalantly picked up his martini and sipped, his eyes turning a shade darker as he waited for her to respond. Lauren was aware that she was staring open-mouthed at this beautiful stranger, floating effortlessly as if in a dream. She jumped back to reality when Miles tapped on her shoulder. You ready, girl? She quickly closed her mouth and stood clumsily. Yes, I'm coming. Her heart accelerated, knowing that her encounter with David was drawing to a close. Thank you for the water. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. He stood, took her hand in his, and kissed it, his full lips warm and moist on her skin. It's been a great pleasure meeting you, Lauren. He was irresistible, standing before her like a Greek god. She had never laid eyes on anyone so beautiful. She nodded quickly and politely, withdrew her hand, his warmth lingering on her skin. Miles settled onto the piano bench and whispered a little too loudly, Who's the pretty boy that's got your panties all in a wad? Shh, Miles! She was mortified and quickly looked over at David to make sure he hadn't heard. Miles laughed and began tinkling on the piano keys, a cue for Tim to turn off the canned music so they could resume the show. Lauren gave him a stern look, and he mocked, blowing her a kiss as if to let her know he was just being playful. She took a deep, cleansing breath before facing the crowded bar and started to sing If I Were a Belle from the musical Guys and Dolls for Charles. She didn't dare look at David for more than a few seconds at a time, aware that a couple of patrons had recognized him and approached him, some of them taking photos as if he were a piece of art on display. A hotel security guard eventually ended up hovering near him, waving them off in an attempt to give the man some space. She felt sorry for David having to be guarded in public, wondering if the price of fame was worth it. She noticed that after every song she sang, he always led the applause and nodded, looking like he was enjoying himself. As the set came to a close, she decided to be bold and dedicate the last song of the evening to him. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lauren Rose, and on the baby grand is my friend Miles Brooks. We're here every Friday night at the beautiful St. Regis Hotel. Before we say goodnight, we have one more song for you. I would like to dedicate this to my new friend. She paused before his name left her lips. David. His reaction was priceless. He raised his eyebrows in surprise and offered an accepting nod and killer smile. Here goes nothing, she whispered to herself. Miles started the haunting melody of the 1940s classic jazz song, The Nearness of You. She closed her eyes, gripping the microphone, attempting to relax. She was trying to communicate with this man the best way she knew how, through song. If he really listened, perhaps he might appreciate her gesture. She sang of pale moons and sweet conversations, imagining what it would feel like to have David Randall hold her in his enchanting arms. To be granted the right to feel the nearness of him was every hot-blooded American girl's dream. She was sure of it. The song ended with the last note from the piano fading into the air before the interruption of applause from the entire bar roared in her ears. She was stunned and smiled, taking a small bow before gesturing to Miles, who also stood and bowed. David clapped exuberantly, nodding his gorgeous head and bringing 2 fingers to his lips to whistle. She blushed and quickly hugged her duo partner. Thank you, Miles. You were wonderful as always. We can look through the tips next time. Just remind me that Charles gave me a 50. I trust you. She grabbed her purse in obvious hurry. He kissed her cheek knowingly. Go get him, Lauren.